In the autumn of 1943, the Red Army had a problem that could be stated entirely in inches. The front plate of a German Tiger measured 4 inches of flat-rolled steel. The turret front measured the same, and the mantlet around the gun ran thicker still. The standard Soviet tank gun of that year, the 76mm, could not defeat 4 inches of flat plate at any range where the Tiger's own 88mm could not defeat everything the Red Army had. The exchange was not close. It was arithmetic, and the arithmetic was against the Soviet side. The Red Army already had a self-propelled gun built to answer that problem. It had not worked. The SU-122 carried a 122mm howitzer, the M30S, a weapon adapted from a towed field piece designed to drop shells onto fortifications from beyond sight. Against a moving tank, it was the wrong instrument in every measurable way. Its shell left the barrel at roughly 1100 feet per second, which is slow enough that a gunner had to lead a target and hope. Its practical direct fire range with an armor-piercing round was barely 300 yards, which meant the vehicle had to close to a distance where the German gunner could not miss either. Its 2-piece ammunition and screw breech held the practical rate of fire to 2 rounds per minute. Its front plate was 1 3/4 inches, which the 88mm treated as an absence of armor. A high-explosive anti-tank round existed for it from May of 1943, but the warhead and fuse were primitive and the results were unreliable. The Soviet answer was to stop trying to make a howitzer behave like an anti-tank gun and to put a real anti-tank gun on the same chassis. The gun already existed, and it had not been built for tanks at all. The 85mm air defense gun of 1939, the weapon the Red Army called the 52K, was a high-velocity anti-aircraft piece designed to throw a shell several miles into the sky. A gun built to reach an aircraft at altitude is a gun with a flat trajectory and a great deal of energy at the muzzle, which is the same specification an anti-tank gun is written to. The Soviet Union had these guns in quantity in the field already in production. The Red Army also had a Tiger. Intact German heavy tanks had been captured on the Leningrad front, and one of them was put in front of the 85mm anti-aircraft gun to establish what the weapon could actually do to it. The trial results were written down plate by plate, and they are the most useful numbers in the entire story of the SU-85, because everything that came afterward was a decision made on the strength of them. Against the Tiger's side, 3 1/4 inches of plate, the 85mm armor-piercing shell fired at 875 yards, produced a penetration with a breech measuring roughly 14 inches by 9. At 1600 yards, still against the side, it penetrated with an entrance hole of about 4.5 inches and an exit hole of about 15 inches, which describes a plate coming apart rather than being drilled. Against the Tiger's lower front plate, 4 inches thick at 1100 yards, it penetrated with an entrance of about 6 inches and an exit of about 6 1/4. Against the Tiger's upper front plate at 1600 yards, the shell made a dent 1 1/4 inches deep and 5 inches across, and stopped. The Commission wrote the conclusion in one sentence. The armor-piercing shell could penetrate the side of a Tiger, 3 1/4 inches thick from 1600 yards, and the front 4 inches thick from 1100 yards. That sentence authorized everything that followed. The Red Army had a gun that could defeat a Tiger. It did not have that gun on anything that could move with a mechanized core. 2 design bureaus were given the job of fixing that. From the 25th of July to the 6th of August 1943, competing prototypes ran at the Gorohovets proving grounds, covering more than 300 miles and firing over 300 shots. Vasily Grabin's Central Artillery Design Bureau entered a vehicle mounting the S-18 gun. Fyodor Petrov's bureau at Factory No. 9 on the Uralmash site entered one mounting the D5, an 85mm derived directly from the 52K anti-aircraft gun. A third design was eliminated early for serious defects. The S-18 had been the favoured gun going in. The trials found that Petrov's weapon matched it ballistically and beat it on reliability, and the Commission recommended Petrov's vehicle. It was accepted for service on the 7th of August 1943. On the 8th of August, the State Defence Committee, issued Decree No. 3892 SS, authorizing the SU-85. 17 days later, on the 25th of August, series production began at the Ural Heavy Machine Building Plant, the works known as Uralmash, in Sverdlovsk, more than 1,000 miles behind the fighting. That interval is the most revealing figure in the vehicle's history. 17 days from authorization to a production line is not a development program. It is a substitution. What made 17 days possible was that almost nothing about the vehicle was new. The chassis was the T-34, already in mass production at the same plant. The casemate hull was the SU-122's, already tooled. The engine was the same V12 diesel of 493 horsepower. The gun, the 85mm D5T, was an adaptation of the anti-aircraft weapon the Soviet Union was already building and was simultaneously being fitted to the KV-85 heavy tank. The SU-85 was not designed so much as assembled out of parts that already existed, because the Red Army did not have the months that designing would have cost. Everything that was sacrificed to that. The first sacrifice was the turret. The SU-85 had none. The gun sat in a fixed casemate with a traverse of 10 degrees either side of centre, a total arc of 20 degrees. A turreted tank swings its gun through a full circle without moving. The SU-85 had a 20-degree window, and anything outside that window required turning the entire 32.5-ton vehicle on its tracks, which takes time, makes noise, throws dust, and moves the hull. Against a target that appears where it is not expected, 20 degrees is not a firing arc, it is a bet placed in advance. The second sacrifice was armour. The front plate was 1 3/4 inches. That is the same figure the SU-122 carried, and the same figure that the 88mm had already proved it could ignore. The design added a gun capable of hurting a tiger without adding any protection against a tiger. The asymmetry that produced is worth stating precisely, because it defined every engagement the vehicle ever fought. The Tiger's 88mm, firing its standard armour-piercing round, defeated about 4 inches of angled plate at 1,100 yards and about 3 1/4 inches at 2,200 yards. The SU-85's front was 1 3/4 inches. The Tiger could therefore defeat an SU-85 at 2,200 yards with most of its performance still in reserve and at considerably beyond that. The SU-85, by the proving ground's own numbers, needed to be inside 1,100 yards to defeat a Tiger's front, and its crews would shortly report needing to be closer still. The Tiger could win the engagement at more than twice the range at which the SU-85 could win it. That was not a flaw in the design, it was the design. The trade was deliberate and understood, and it committed the vehicle to a single doctrine before a single hull left Sverdlovsk. The SU-85 was expected to shoot first, from a place the Tiger had not looked, because in any engagement where both vehicles saw each other at the same moment, the arithmetic had already decided the outcome. The third sacrifice was the crew, 4 men, where the vehicle's job called for more. The commander in an SU-85 was also working the gun sight. A man watching through a gun sight is looking at a 20-degree slice of the battlefield, not at the battlefield. The vehicle that most needed to see everything was crewed by men who could see very little. What the design bought in exchange was worth having. 32.5 tons on a T-34's running gear moved at 34 miles per hour on a road and carried about 175 miles of fuel, or 250 with auxiliary tanks. Removing the turret dropped the silhouette, and a low vehicle in a tree line is a vehicle that does not get seen. 48 rounds rode inside. The standard armour-piercing round, the BR-365, left the muzzle at roughly 2,600 feet per second and made about 4 inches of plate at 1,100 yards. A sub-caliber round, the BR-365P, left at roughly 3,400 feet per second and made about 5.5 inches at 550 yards when it struck square. Soviet doctrine read those numbers and drew the only conclusion available. The SU-85 was organized into self-propelled artillery regiments of 16 vehicles, 4 batteries of 4, with 1 T-34 riding as the commander's vehicle for 17 hulls in total. Those regiments were not to lead. They were to move as anti-tank screens ahead of infantry and behind advancing armour, engaging at 550 to 1100 yards from positions chosen before the enemy arrived. Ambush was not a tactic the crews invented in the field. Ambush was the vehicle's specification expressed as a manual. A 20-degree traverse and 1 3/4 inches of armour permit exactly one way of fighting, which is to be already aimed at the place the enemy will be, and to be somewhere else before he works out where the shot came from. The first regiment to receive the vehicle was the 1435th Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment, which was attached to the 68th Army by the 2nd of October 1943. The SU-85 went to war roughly 5 weeks after the first hull came off the line at Sverdlovsk. The best documented combat record belongs to a different unit. The 1440th Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment had been formed in April of 1943 with batteries of SU-122s and SU-76s, and it had already spent that equipment. With the SU-122, the regiment had lost 6 vehicles irrecoverably, while claiming 19 German tanks knocked out, 15 burned out, and 3 self-propelled guns. Then it re-equipped with the SU-85. On the 15th of October 1943, the 1440th entered the Pyatikhatka operation, initially under the 53rd Army. The operation ran from the 15th of October to the 3rd of November, driving southwest out of the Soviet bridgeheads on the Dnieper toward Krivoy Rog. The town of Pyatikhatka itself, a rail junction 35 miles beyond the river, fell on the 19th of October to the 5th Guards Tank Army, cutting the main lines to Dnipropetrovsk. By the 1st of November, the 1440th had been transferred to the 7th Mechanized Corps. By the 1st of December, it was part of the 7th Mechanized Corps of the 2nd Ukrainian Front. That is the operation, and those are the dates. The Soviet Commission that later examined the regiment's experience with the new vehicle recorded the result in one line of arithmetic. The 1440th lost 5 U-85s. It claimed 18 German tanks. 6 of the 18 were identified as Tigers. The second figure in that report matters more than the first. Every surviving SU-85 in the regiment carried hits on its front armour. The Commission measured the damage and recorded dents up to 1 inch deep, which were welded over, and the vehicles returned to service. 1 3/4 inches of plate struck repeatedly, dented to 1 inch, and still holding. Those crews were being hit at ranges where German rounds arrived with most of their energy intact, and the vehicles were coming back. The margin was 1 inch. It was also, for a vehicle nobody expected to survive being shot at, a margin that existed at all. The crews wrote down what they had learned about the gun, and their numbers are specific. A Tiger's armour could be defeated from the front at 650 to 875 yards. From the side it could be defeated at 1300 to 1400 yards. Those two figures are the entire tactical doctrine of the SU-85 compressed into one sentence. The flank shot was worth roughly twice the range of the frontal shot. A commander who could arrange to be shooting at flanks was fighting a different engagement from the one the Tiger crew thought they were in. Those figures deserve to be set beside the proving grounds. The trial against the captured Tiger had established the front as penetrable at 1100 yards and the side at 1600. The crews who did it under fire reported the front at 875 and the side at 1400. The gun had lost roughly 200 yards of frontal reach and 200 yards of flank reach between the range at Gorohovets and the fighting west of the Dnieper. Nothing had changed about the gun. What changed was everything around it. A proving ground supplies a stationary target, a known distance, a measured charge, a rested gunner, and a plate presented square. A tree line west of Pyatikhatka supplies a target that is moving, at a range that must be estimated, struck at whatever angle the ground and the driver happen to produce, by a commander who is also the gunner, and who is looking through a 20-degree slice of the world. The 200 yards that vanish between the trial and the report is the cost of the difference, and it was subtracted from a margin that had never been generous. A vehicle that needed to be inside 1100 yards was now a vehicle that needed to be inside 875 against a gun that could reach it at 2200. The 6 Tigers require a caution that the record itself demands. Soviet combat reports of 1943 and 1944 used the word Tiger as a catch-all. It was applied to heavy German tanks and to any German vehicle that looked heavy at range through a gun sight, in dust, under fire, with a 20-degree field of view. A late-model Panzer IV with skirting plate has a boxy hull and a squared turret, and at 800 yards through an optic it can present as something much larger. The figure of 6 is what the 1440th reported. It is a claim, not a confirmation, and no German loss return has been matched to it. The honest statement is that the regiment claimed 18 tanks and identified 6 of them as Tigers, and that the identification was made by men who had strong reasons to be certain and very little ability to be sure. The verdict of the officer who commanded them is the most useful assessment in the file, because it is both positive and precise about the limits. Colonel Fyodor Katkov, commander of the 7th Mechanized Corps, rated the SU-85 the most effective means available for fighting German heavy tanks. He then specified what it lacked. He wanted thicker frontal armour, and he wanted a gun that could defeat a Tiger at 1600 to 2200 yards. The gun he had could do it at 875. Katkov's request describes a gap of more than half a mile between what his regiments could do and what he needed them to do, and he wrote it while rating the vehicle the best thing he had. Then there was the problem the SU-85 could not solve at any range, from any angle in front of it, with any round it carried. The Panther's upper glacis was just over 3 inches of plate set at 55 degrees from the vertical. The thickness is not the point, the angle is the point. A round striking that plate does not travel through 3 inches of steel. It travels through the diagonal, and the diagonal through 3 inches of plate laid at 55 degrees is about 5.5 inches of steel standing in the path of the shot. The SU-85 standard armour-piercing round made about 4 inches at 1100 yards. Closing the range does not close a gap of that size. Point blank, the round is still short of the plate, and the plate is angled to throw it off rather than let it bite. The consequence is a flat statement with no drama in it. The SU-85 could not defeat a Panther's glacis frontally. Not at 800 yards, not at 400, not at 50. The scale of that failure is a matter of production figures. Germany built 1,347 Tigers across the whole war, and stopped building them in August of 1944. Germany built 6,040 Panthers, and more than 2,000 of them came off the lines in 1944 alone, the year the SU-85 did most of its fighting. The vehicle rushed into production in 17 days to answer German heavy armour, could answer the German heavy tank that Germany built, 1,347 of, and could not answer, from the front, the one it built 6,040 of. The SU-85 was built to beat the rarer tank. The tank it met most often on the Ukrainian steppe in 1944 was the one its gun could not reach. What remained were the flanks and the mantlet. A Panther's side plates were a fraction of the glacis and were set nearly upright, and against those the 85mm was entirely sufficient. So the SU-85's doctrine narrowed again. It had been an ambush vehicle by design. Against the Panther, it became an ambush vehicle by necessity, one that had to be positioned on a flank before the engagement opened, because if a Panther came at it head-on, there was no round in the rack that would change the outcome. 20 degrees of traverse and a target that must be struck in the side is a demand for the enemy to drive past a gun he has not seen. That is possible. It is also not something a regiment can promise a corps commander. The SU-85 fought through the Ukrainian campaign under exactly that constraint. The 7th Mechanized Corps, with the 1440th in its order of battle, closed on Kirovograd in the first week of January 1944 and helped encircle and take the city on the 8th of January. The Corps received the Order of the Red Banner for it on the 15th. In March and April, it fought through the Uman and Botasani operation, taking Novokranka on the 17th of March and receiving the honorific Novokranka for it on the 18th, and taking Pervomaisk on the 22nd of March. Through that entire advance, the SU-85 did the work it was built for, which was to sit on the flank of a mechanized corps and make German counterattacks expensive, and it did that work with a gun that could not touch the front of a Panther. The Soviet response to that was not to improve the SU-85, it was to replace it, and the timeline of the replacement is the clearest verdict anyone ever passed on the vehicle. In the spring of 1944, the T-34-85 entered mass production. It carried the same 85mm class of gun in a full 360-degree turret on the same chassis, with the same protection. Everything the Su-85 could do, a T-34-85 could now do without having to be aimed in advance. The Su-85's only remaining argument for existing was firepower. It no longer uniquely possessed. A tank destroyer that cannot outshoot the medium tank it is built from has no reason to be on a production line. The replacement was the Su-100, mounting the 100mm D-10S on the same hull. The origin of that gun repeats the origin of the first one almost exactly. The D-10 was the work of Fyodor Petrov at the Design Bureau of Artillery Factory No. 9, the same designer and the same bureau on the same Uralmash site that had produced the D-5 2 years earlier. And like the D-5, it was not built for tanks. The D-5 had come from an anti-aircraft gun. The D-10 came from the B-34, a 100mm naval anti-aircraft weapon designed to engage aircraft over warships. Twice in 2 years, the Soviet answer to German armour was to take a gun designed to shoot at the sky and point it at the ground. The figures explain the decision without any argument being needed. The Su-100 could defeat about 5 inches of vertical plate at 2,200 yards. Against the Panther's sloped glacis, the plate that had been immune to the 85mm at point blank, the Su-100 could penetrate at roughly 1,600 yards. The problem that had defined the Su-85's entire combat career was solved by a larger gun on the identical vehicle, from the same bureau, built in the same plant. Katkov had asked for a weapon that could defeat German heavy armour at 1,600 to 2,200 yards. The Su-100 is that request, granted roughly a year late. There was an interval to cover while the 100mm guns arrived. In September 1944, Uralmash began building the Su-85M, which was an Su-100 hull with the old 85mm gun in it, carrying thicker frontal armour, a commander's cupola, and 60 rounds instead of 48. 315 were built. The Su-85M is the design admitting in metal what the combat reports had said in words. The hull was fixed. The vision was fixed. The ammunition load was increased. The gun stayed wrong, because the right gun was not ready yet. Production of the Su-85 ended in November 1944. 2,650 were built in 15 months, from a plant in Sverdlovsk that had gone from a decree to a production line in 17 days. The record those 15 months left is narrow and it is real. One regiment, the 1440th, entered the Pyatikhatka operation on the 15th of October 1943, lost 5 vehicles, claimed 18 German tanks, and reported 6 of them as Tigers. Its surviving vehicles came home with 1-inch dents welded shut in 1 3/4 inches of plate. Its crews reported defeating a Tiger's front at 8,775 yards and its flank at 1,400. Its corps commander called it the best thing he had and asked for something better in the same document. The Su-85 was in production for 15 months and was obsolete for the last 6 of them. It was authorised in 17 days because the Red Army had no time, and it was replaced inside a year because 17 days does not buy a weapon that lasts. It could fight a Tiger. It could not answer a Panther from the front. The vehicle that could was the same hull with a bigger gun, and the Red Army built more than 2,500 Su-85s finding that out.